Every now and then, someone comes up with an idea that affects the lives of everyone. Like the cranks who wanted to fly around the beginning of the century. It wasn't long before the idea caught on. And even if we couldn't own our own flying machine, we could buy tickets on someone else's. It wasn't the most comfortable way to get around, but what sold the tickets was getting there sooner, at 80 miles an hour. The 1930s, 200 miles an hour. The 1940s, and speeds up now to 320 miles an hour. And with the jet engines of the 50s, speeds hit 500 miles an hour. Now just under 600 miles an hour. By bringing nations closer together, a family of man has become a possibility. But for 15 years, aircraft have gotten bigger but no faster. Faraway places have stayed far away. So if shrinking distances is what sold tickets before, where next? Enter Concorde, the next generation of passenger aircraft. The supersonic age is here. A joint project by the British and French, Concorde will carry over 100 passengers at twice the speed of sound, more than twice as fast as today's airliners. The family of nations becomes even more of a reality. That's the promise of this soaring shape. There's an old saying amongst aircraft makers and pilots that if an aircraft looks right, it is right. And the aviation community seems agreed that this Concorde will take its place in the list of the century's most beautiful planes. But it's not the speed or the beauty that matters. What matters is whether travel is important and faster travel more important. 100 years ago, the world was a million small places separated by days. Most men spent their lives within 30 miles of home. As Mark Twain wrote then, travel is fatal to prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. The ability to move around easily has changed our world, and as each step towards faster travel has made the world shrink, national boundaries have become smaller barriers. Scientists, statesmen, businessmen, and academics who need to cross those barriers regularly for the contacts that increase the world's understanding will become familiar with this new shape in the skies. The shape wasn't dreamed up overnight. Early efforts to beat the speed of sound showed that new wing shapes were needed to overcome the effect of the shock waves of sound generated by a moving aircraft. In the 50s, experiments showed that a delta wing could cope with the changes in the center of lift that occur when an aircraft goes supersonic. This British Fairey Delta II took the world speed record in 1956 at over 1,000 miles an hour. The delta wing shape has special aerodynamics in which the airflow doesn't stay attached to it but rolls across it. The principle was put into practice in a succession of supersonic aircraft which showed astonishing control at all speeds. But already British and French thoughts were turning to an airliner, and in the early 60s, joint design projects built special aircraft just to test the wing shapes that led directly to the Concorde. A dozen years after that little test machine, the full-scale model is a highly successful aircraft. Wheels down, and Concorde turns for home and land. As the speed falls off, that beak-like nose droops down to give the pilot a clear view of the runway. With its wheels stuck out on long legs, this Concorde looks more than any other aircraft like a great bird reaching for the ground. A brave and beautiful sight. But who needs it? The answer is right here. An international airport in its rush hour. Each airline today is facing problems because of the very success of air transport. Year by year, new groups of passengers want to travel, but they all have different priorities. The problem is that no matter what they pay or how urgent their need to travel, they'll all go on the same plane at about 600 miles an hour. No matter how much he pays, no passenger can get there any faster than 600 miles an hour. But there's a different future in store for tomorrow's Concorde passenger, returning perhaps from a trip to London. In this simulation, we can see what supersonic travel will mean to the fare-paying passenger.
At 10:30 to New York, Concorde.
There'll probably be the same airline service and the same airport handling, though there's bound to be a special excitement.
Flight will be called through shortly.
For the first-time Concorde traveler, the slim fuselage with its 4 abreast seating offers the comfort of the executive jet.
Team B, that's the second cabin. Morning, sir.
The big difference will really become noticeable when in the air, for airlines will once again be selling their favorite commodity, not the snobbery of exclusiveness, but the exclusiveness of speed.
Our estimated flight time to New York will be 3.5 hours.
3.5 hours instead of 7, that's what Concorde means. It's as if someone chopped 1,500 miles out of the Atlantic.
Position, with a table in front of you stowed, ready for takeoff. Thank you.
And if airlines operating Concorde use it to carry most of their first-class traffic, the existing slower jets could carry the economy passengers with increased seating capacity and lower fares. This would make better use of all the new wide-bodied subsonics and attract to a supersonic plane people prepared to pay the higher fares if they're actually getting something extra for their extra money. Introducing an SST means rethinking the whole structure of international travel. Here are the sort of time savings that international airline operators can offer and international passengers can use. Time savings that really are dramatic. The fast line is Concorde. The slow one is one of today's jets. From New York to Rio de Janeiro, cut from 10 hours to 6.25. Los Angeles to Tokyo shows an even more dramatic saving. More of the route is over ocean, so more can be flown supersonic, cutting today's 13 hours to 6 hours and 15 minutes. Take two spots on opposite sides of the globe. Sydney, Australia, and Paris, France are nearly as far apart as you can get. In a modern subsonic, the journey should take 28 hours and 40 minutes, and those last 40 minutes must seem like forever. In Concorde, the journey will be slashed to 15 hours. Suddenly, no two places will be more than 15 hours apart. The Wright brothers would be quietly satisfied to see the Earth shrink. Arriving in North America from Europe will have one curious side effect. Concorde flies faster than the sun, or rather, a little faster than the Earth rotates.
And the local time is 9 a.m.
So after a 3.5 hour flight, this man is arriving before he left.
You have all your personal belongings with you. We hope you've enjoyed your flight and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
To him, that Atlantic crossing isn't a journey anymore. It's become just a short hop. Arriving in New York, he gets to his office fresh and ready for a full day's work. The man in a hurry could go to Europe and back in a day because a transatlantic flight would be no longer than many American domestic flights. To some of us, it would seem like a waste, but the man paying first class does so for a reason. A recent survey among American businessmen has shown a positive attitude to supersonic travel. It indicated that the great majority of business travelers would use it, that many who travel economy today would pay a premium for faster travel, and that they'd travel more.
Well, I'm here on business. I flew in from Miami. The flying time was about 8 hours. I'm tired. I've had about 2 hours of sort of cramped sleep and a mediocre movie and very good food.
If you could have made the journey in 3.5 hours, even if the seats were more expensive, what would your attitudes be to this sort of aircraft?
If I could make that trip in 3.5 hours, I make the trip quite often. If I could make the trip in 3.5 hours or any time getting close to that, I would certainly take advantage of it.
There's a possibility that this aircraft might only fly a first-class service. Would that affect you at all?
No. I think that we have to sort of determine the value of our time and the condition in which we are when we arrive here. My day is almost completely shot now. And I'll go to the hotel and I'll rest and maybe get some work done late this afternoon. So then, in effect, I've used up almost 14, 15 hours of time. If I could do this trip in 3.5 or 4 hours and be able to do some productive work when I get here, then I think this would more than offset the increased seat cost.
Well, I'm on a business trip. I'm a lawyer and been in the air for 6 hours plus. and I'm feeling fairly groggy.
Now, on this journey you've just made, how would you regard an aircraft that would have cut your flying time in half, even if the seats were more expensive?
Well, I would have been very glad to cut my flying time in half.
How are you feeling now?
Tired.
How would you have regarded an aircraft on this journey you've just made that would have reduced your flying time to 3.5 hours, even if the seats were more expensive?
I probably would take the shorter trip. You're speaking of the Concorde, no doubt.
No doubt, yes. What views do you have on this aircraft, sir?
It's beautiful.
Do you feel inclined to use it with what it offers?
I think I probably would.
Well, of course, the price would be a factor, but I think any businessman traveling, the quicker you can get from point A to point B, I think it'd almost be foolish not to go along with the system.
Even if it's more expensive?
If it were more expensive, but to a point of how much more expensive, I think that would have to be a consideration. The time is what I think would be the most important selling point.
I don't travel first class on the normal flights because I don't think it's good value. If you go on the Concorde and you go in half the time, you're getting something for your money.
We have a plant here in England, and we have meetings here once a month. I think that I would probably make every meeting, if it were possible to do it a little more conveniently. As it is, I maybe make every other meeting. So that I'm sure that a shorter travel time would increase the number of trips that you would take.
In other words, they'd have more chance to get around. Normally, when you make that long of a crossing, you don't turn around and come back that same night. I'm not too sure. Under supersonic flight, that may be could be a happening.
And that kind of happening will help more than just the world of industry and commerce. Personal contact between the world's leaders must help to improve the prospect for the future of us all. From New York, Bruce Munn, UPI correspondent at the United Nations.
In my 25 years around here at the United Nations, many things have changed. One thing that remains constant is that this is the world's greatest forum for diplomats to meet and confer and talk things over. Things that have changed in the last quarter century, I believe most of all, would be transportation. It used to take a week or more for diplomats to come from their capitals to talk here. I recall many years ago, they used to say that the diplomats would hang around until the last hoot of the Queen. That, of course, meant the last sounding of the whistle or the horn of the old Queen Mary or the Queen Elizabeth that would get the diplomats out of New York and back to their home country in time for Christmas. Now, of course, they don't have to rely on telephone or on cable to get instructions for their home offices. With supersonic transport, in actually almost less time than the clock tells, they can have the actual papers they need. They can have the instructions they require from their prime ministers or from their heads of state to discuss things here. Of course, as speed of transportation increases, so will the fluency and the frequency of top-level consultations, which should bode well for the world of peace.
In factories in Britain and France, Concordes are being built. Already 16 aircraft are at some stage of construction. All along, design has been within the state of the art. The airframe is basically a familiar aluminum alloy. The engines themselves are developments of a proven design which were tested endlessly on the ground and in the air. Even so, the high technology needed in so advanced an aircraft have made it the European equivalent of the space program. The big British and French government investments will be repaid in research and development spin-off for decades to come. Concorde, like any major new development, has attracted critics. The automobile and flying itself both drew complaints in their time. People said automobiles would frighten horses, and they did. In this environment-conscious age, criticism must be taken seriously. Prototype Concordes made everyone shudder at the amount of smoke they belched out. But the early engines were designed purely for thrust. The production models have redesigned combustion chambers, making the engines a lot cleaner than many regular aircraft flying today. Airport noise is a big issue today. Supersonic engines cannot easily be quietened, but work is being carried out to bring Concorde airport noise down to the level of today's 707s and DC-8s, for example. And there'll be more of those than Concordes flying around for some years to come. And sure, sonic boom can be unpleasant. It's an inevitable feature of supersonic flight. But just because Concorde can fly supersonically doesn't mean it must. So its routes will be chosen to avoid disturbing people with the boom. It's just a question of organization. One of the more complex criticisms was that the oxides of nitrogen released from the Concorde engine exhausts into the stratosphere at cruise height would combine with the oxygen in the ozone layer, destroy it, and let huge amounts of damaging ultraviolet rays through to the surface of the Earth. From Imperial College London and the former visiting professor of meteorology at New York University, Professor Richard Scorer.
The atmosphere is a very robust system, and H-bombs and thunderstorms and other violent phenomena of the weather have introduced large amounts of oxides of nitrogen into the stratosphere. And there is no evidence whatever that these have any effect on the amount of ozone. In fact, the natural variations are so large that nobody has ever been able to detect any artificial effect on the ozone. And I'm quite sure that there is no need to worry about what a few aeroplanes will put in by comparison with what nature is already doing.
So Concorde shrinks the world. Athens. When the legendary Icarus flew too near the sun, it melted the wax that fixed his feathers to his arms, and he fell to his death. The heat remains and didn't bother Concorde when the prototype arrived there on the first leg of a major route-proving voyage around the world in 1972. Beirut, which is an important crossroads for all the world's airlines. Bombay, India, monsoon time. Singapore. The route was testing out all manner of climates and runways and revealed another important Concorde feature. She uses existing airports and handling equipment. So the big program of runway extensions that was needed for the last generation of big subsonic jets won't have to be repeated. Tokyo, Japan. In 1952, just 20 years ago, only 30,000 Americans went there in a year. Today, with the help of the jet, 10 times that number meet the Japanese in their own country. When Tokyo is just 6 hours from San Francisco by Concorde, how many more will travel there? And finally, Sydney. Australia is a huge land, still unfamiliar to most of the world. When Concorde cuts the Pacific in half, Australia will become a near neighbor. In 1975, Concordes will go into airline service on that blue ribbon transatlantic route, and already the experts are extending a welcome. Mr. Gordon Bennett, FAA representative in London.
The United States Federal Aviation Administration has been following closely the development and testing of Concorde. In our view, this is a tremendous technological achievement and will contribute significantly to the future of air transportation. We've also been following the certification of Concorde in the United Kingdom and in France. United States certification of Concorde should follow closely the certification abroad. As this new supersonic transport becomes ready to enter the world air transportation systems, we must all be ready to review our rules and our procedures to be sure that this aircraft can be accommodated appropriately in the world's airspace. We in the FAA join the aviation community throughout the world in congratulating the British and the French on this significant contribution to the future of world air transportation.